Hello, everyone. We are back. I'm sorry I couldn't stream yesterday. I had plans, but they kind of fell through and it was too late. Oh well, we're here today and we're gonna make the most of it because, as it turns out, and I'll mention this again at the end of the stream, just so everyone knows, I will be out of town next week, so I won't be streaming at all. I don't think I'll be able to maybe I'll try to vlog a minute or two. That's what creators do. I'm a content creator now. That's what they do, right? Maybe I should do that. But probably not. Don't expect to hear or see anything from me next week. But we'll be back in full force after that. No more to this you know, skipping around, taking all this time off. No. We're gonna get back to it. We are prepared as ever. Today we have some white tea. It's a blend called War and Peach. My girlfriend got it, and it's very good, so I stole it, and it's mine now. No, that's not true. She she let me have it because I enjoyed it so much. I'm sure she can get more if she wants. And of course, I'm an appreciator of the pun War and Peach. I don't know. There's something about certain subcultures tends to have a there's just it's something about, they just like puns that have to do with that subculture. It's not like ubiquitous through it. It's not like tea makers across the board, but like people who make their own local tea blends, big on puns. Uh, well, yeah, I imagine Peachy Keen that you would appreciate peach puns. Yeah, you know what? That makes sense to me. I have no confusion about that. But it happens all over the place, right? Lots of teas have puns built into them. The one place I go to is Game Shop that also sells loose leaf tea, so it's all like gaming puns. That's why I have like Princess Peach tea and Ceylon, things like that. But then there's also I've also seen that it's kind of a thing in well, I've heard that it's a thing in like professional poker commentary and a few other niches where it's like somehow you get into these subcultures and like there's this one section where the puns come out in full force, and I'm on the lookout. I'm always hoping to be there. I love me some puns. All beverage makers say beer, wine, etc. Yeah, if I don't know what it is, it's like if it's some like small scale local thing or just like some small part of the subculture, suddenly just tons and tons of puns, which I'm a fan of. I appreciate that. I'm glad people are already showing up, so we can. Oh, I'm a little sad. I had a bit of a surprise, but he's run off. There's a guest at the moment. My sister's watching her someone's dog. I don't remember exactly who's it. And he's very cute. He's a golden doodle. His name is Charlie, and I wanted to show him on stream because he is just so adorable. But I got him as far as right here, ready to go. But then uh, I was carrying him before that. I let him down on my lap and then immediately took off and was like, well, I'm not gonna hold you here, but I was hoping to show him off because he is very cute. He's quite adorable and hear it very rarely, so I wanted to let y'all see this adorable little doggy that we have access to at the moment. Big ol' smile. It's very cute. That said, my plan for today was to do entirely politics, talk about like Trump in Iowa, but the videos I can find of him being in Iowa are only a few minutes long, so we're not going to make a full stream out of that. But I didn't want to talk about it. Politics is a thing that I did want to cover more and to talk about a little bit more. In fact, maybe I'll mention briefly. Um, Actually, I think I will get to something else that's politics related, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit. This is, in some ways, one of the most accessible things as far as seeing philosophy in action. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I mean, obviously, political philosophy is a big deal. It's something that's been thought about for, who knows how long. We even I mean, Plato's Republic, was musing on what the ideal government should look like, and I'm sure he wasn't the first. And so you can like see it in action on larger scales. Now that said, philosophy is a thing that happens like all the time, just everyday life. It's constantly there, even if you don't know it. But this is one of the ways where it's a little more accessible, and some of the stuff that we pick up on while learning these debate ideas and discussing them will show up in politics all the time. But this is mostly like, let's just have some fun with it because Trump and DeSantis are squaring off. if you are unaware of some of the details, I'm not going to assume you don't know who Donald Trump is. I'm not going to pretend you're living under a rock, but in case you're unaware, Ron DeSantis, or sorry, DeSantis. It's so awkward to say, but apparently that's how his name's pronounced. I don't want to like dead name or anything. Um, Announced his presidential campaign on Twitter to an absolute. It was bad. It was real bad. Combination of Twitter being all wacky and non-functional, and also just the the nature of the event. Because one of the things that's worth pointing out was, which other people have already. I'm not the first to this. I watched a bunch of coverage of on before today, but as people have pointed out, is as much as it seems like, oh, this open forum, anyone can go. Well, yeah, anyone can go. You don't need to. You won't get shut out of the room. Except you will, because Twitter was so bad that it crashed with too many people in it. Elon, shutting off servers at random, just flicking the light switches on and off, something like that. Yeah, they had a lot of problems with that. But the idea of like, oh, you can just hop in. There's no security blocking the door, or you don't have to have a ticket or know somebody. It had that appearance, but in fact, it was a lot less free in a lot of more important ways, which is that the only people who were able to ask questions were the pre-approved people with like pre-approved questions, like Elon Musk and the guy he approved to ask questions were the only one asking questions. So you didn't really have any really tough ones. I was gonna joke like asking like what's with the fascism, but obviously that's not really a hard question. That's just one that he would deflect from or whatever. But nobody with actually difficult questions. It was mostly stuff that allowed him to address and um, spin whatever he needed to, and however in whatever he wanted, no real pushback. But that's kind of besides the point. So he announced his presidential candidacy, and before he did, Trump was firing back. I say firing back because that's the feel, but no shots have been fired. But that's Trump, right? That's what makes him a funny guy, I guess, is the word some people have used. And their their primary run is gearing up to be, well, we'll say spicy. And just some thoughts on the matter before we get too far into it. I don't like Trump whatsoever. I think the only thing that really prevents him from doing more fascism is that he's extremely incompetent and ultimately not actually interested in fascism. He's just an opportunist. Like, he just wants what's good for Donald Trump. That is his only interest. And uh, when viewed from that lens, all of his decisions make sense. Like, why does he fleece his supporters? Because he doesn't care. They're not people to him. He's just trying to get what's good for old Donnie. There's tales of him using campaign funds to pay off debts. He's in constant trials. I don't like him at all, obviously, and I don't think people should. It's kind of worrying that people do. I kind of get it, but I don't. However, Ron DeSantis is actually kind of terrifying because while I don't think he really believes very much personally, I mean, he modeled his affectations off of Trump like the minute that became advantageous, and as soon as he realized like that was the wake he could swim in. But now he's trying to overtake Trump, and DeSantis is a lot more efficient and effective. You can see what he's done in Florida. It's pretty bad, and to the point where a lot of people are like, listen, if you're LGBT, I know it's not reasonable advice, but you need to get the hell out of there. And I understand it. It is very worrying what he's been doing, what he's been trying to do. A lot of his rhetoric is very like, are you making JQ references? Yeah, probably, right, but just enough plausible deniability. He's a very worrying person because while I don't think Trump is necessarily interested in fascism, he just happens to do it. DeSantis will go with, he's easy to manage from like party perspective, and the Republican Party is very fascist and he's very effective. So I'm more, I of the two of them, Trump would be the preferred nominee in my opinion of the two of them. I'm sure there are going to be other runners, but that have the sway that they have, pretty unlikely in my view. Obviously, I would prefer basically any Democrat, not like actual Democrat. I don't mean like if Ron DeSantis changes parties yesterday and then runs as a Democrat. No, obviously he's worse. But uh, like I think Biden has confirmed he's running again. That I'm not sure about. I'll check up on that before we watch a video. Uh, Actually, I'll just do it now. Why don't we start getting into that? Oh, I gotta mess with my OBS again. 1 second. I hate that it does this. Okay. Let's see if let's see if he's announced his presidency. Okay, so yeah, he did announce his presidency at the end of the last month. I mean, just like a week ago. That's what I thought. Wait, sorry. This. Oh no, this is right. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so yes, Biden is running. Obviously, I'd prefer Biden to either of them. There are a lot better candidates but than Biden, though. He is at the very least a liberal and not a fascist. So we take those. We happily take those until we can get better than a liberal, you know? Step one, the fascists don't win. Step two, the people like actual leftist positions and candidates start to win. We need to not lose before we can win. It's a gaming concept for you there. And so obviously I prefer Biden to either of them or basically any Democratic nominee, but we can watch their squabble because it is, as I say, guaranteed to be extremely spicy. So let's see what Trump has to say. I was trying to find some videos, and you see like here's CBS, but it's 2.5 minutes. Even Fox only have 12 minutes. Why don't we watch the Fox one and and my plan is if this doesn't take too long, which it probably won't, maybe we'll find like a debate to go over, or maybe we'll even do some like PragerU, or maybe we talk with chat because I also expect that there's a chance that I'll want to end stream a little bit early today. So how does that sound, chat? How do y'all like that idea as I sip my tea and wait for a response? Oh, I love this tea. It's so good. Peach tea is very, very good. Peach drinks in general. I don't know. I was gonna say underrated, but I don't know how well they're rated. Peach teas, peach drinks, very, very good. The other piece of advice I'd gotten from a friend is if you're ever at a place that is big on drinks, like your boba place or a place that does smoothies or whatever else, and you're not really sure what to get or what they do well, get the mango drink because it's almost always very, very good. And I have found that that advice is quite accurate to my experience. So mango drinks also quite good. I have also found that with boba honeydew, weirdly like a lot, but I'm getting off the point. Uh, let's watch what this guy has to
They have
say.
a quick trial and they execute the people, and it's a terrible thing when you think about it, but when you
I have
really
no idea what he's talking about, but see, like he's just cutting off, starting in the middle. This is the problem with these shorter videos. I think because I was watching some other coverage of this before I started stream, I think he's talking about executing drug dealers. He was alluding to something about like being able convincing China, or I shouldn't say alluding. He was stating outright that he had like nearly convinced the Chinese government, and by the Chinese government, I mean he just said Xi Jinping because like he doesn't even have the pretense of like the government. Um, Even Trump is like, yeah, what do you mean the government? It's just you. You make the decisions. Well, anyway, he alleges that he had nearly convinced Xi Jinping to like execute Chinese citizens who were involved in the fentanyl trade as far as it gets to as far as smuggling and selling in the United States. And who boy is that like it's interesting that they cut him off like they start this clip here. I wonder if they were just like uh maybe don't include that the try to but I don't know. This is a really weird place to start but it's wacky that he was suggesting he wanted such a thing. Just as a note, while I agree that drugs can be a problem, the problem for the individual is medical. If someone is addicted, that is a medical issue they're having. They need help. not punishment. Punishment doesn't do anything. People who are involved in the sale and trafficking and all this stuff is only really a problem because of the criminalization, and it guarantees that it's done way less safely. Whereas, as we've seen with things like marijuana in a lot of places where it's legalized, suddenly it's businesses selling it and it's regulated, and you have the mechanisms of capitalism governing it. But at the very least, it's mechanisms governing it. Now, I'm not saying that fentanyl necessarily should be legalized. I don't know very much about fentanyl or a lot of other drugs. I'm not saying that it should just be like, yeah, do whatever you want. But the criminalization of these drugs has, in a way, created these drug cartels where they might not have existed before, because now you need these huge organizations to get past the 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 regulations and like the drug war being waged on the other side, and all these people getting locked up for it. Not to mention the number of people imprisoned because of drug crimes is a huge problem, and it's not because of the drug stuff. It's because of the criminalization aspect of it. But I won't get too much into that. I could talk about that for way too long.
Think about it.
I've
The
already talked about it
average
too much.
drug dealer, I just saw a statistic, the average drug dealer in this country kills 500 people over a lifetime. 500.
His source for this, someone he heard someone say that the average drug dealer kills 5 people, and over the last 10 years he's just been like, what's that, 50 people, 500 people? This is, I don't know where he could possibly getting that number from. It's almost certainly nonsense. It's Trump. Do you really believe that he's accurately citing reality? I sincerely doubt it.
People. So when you
I just
look
wanted to
at
get to
that, and
the
China has
DeSantis
no
stuff,
problem. The
but
countries with the death
we should watch
penalty,
all of
they're
it, I
the only
suppose.
ones that don't have a problem with drugs. The only ones that don't. Singapore has a very strong death penalty. If you sell drugs, if you're a dealer, if you sell drugs, you get the death penalty.
Oh, and by the
people
way,
say,
studies have shown that the death penalty not particularly effective as a deterrent for basically any crime. Part of the reason why, as I understand it, is that, well, once you've done that thing, now things can't get worse. So like, fuck it, just do whatever. Like, I've already sold drugs, for example, so I'm gonna get the death penalty, and it doesn't get worse if I kill someone on the way, so there aren't witnesses or whatever else. It ends up not being that effective.
let's go someplace else. Let's go to the
But they
U.S.
don't care
and do
about
it.
effectiveness, right? They care
Well, they
about
don't even do anything to
punishing
you.
the
I mean, they don't
evildoer.
even do anything. And until you get smart, you're going to have a tremendous problem. But I had it so that President Xi was going to give the death
Oh,
penalty
okay, he
to
gets to
people
it.
that made fentanyl and sold it into the U.S.
I don't
But once
necessarily
I
believe
wasn't
him on
there,
this,
that
but who cares?
deal
Like,
died very quickly. He had no choice but to do it too. We were very, very strong. We have a lot
What's
of
with
power
the
over China.
shaking cam? It's
People don't
throwing me
realize
off.
it, but we have tremendous power over China. But they don't use the power. They don't know how to. I don't even think they think we have the power. We have tremendous power over China. Yes, sir, in the back with that beautiful cowboy hat. I want to get. That's going to.
Wait, we just skipped the question. What is up with
And
this?
Ashley Babbitt was killed, shot by, in my opinion, a rogue cop.
So this is another interesting thing, and people might be, well, not when it comes from Trump. People might be confused by why the right rallies behind Ashley Babbitt. There are a couple of things. One, the right is very good about falling in line. It doesn't matter what the situation is. They'll lie. They'll make shit up. They say she was just like, they'll say like she was just in the Capitol building. What's the big deal? Well, as if she weren't participating in an armed insurrection that was at that moment attempting to attack and possibly kill elective representatives. What you have to remember about with Ashley Babbitt in specific, if you're not familiar with who this is, she is one of the 3 people, I believe, who was killed during the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. She was killed in particular she was in a hallway. There was a barricade to prevent the rioters from getting to where the Congress people were being ushered through to safe locations. And there was a barricade, sure, but not a lot of security at that barricade. I think there was I think there were like 2 or 3 people. I think they're police, the Capitol Police. I'm not sure what their designation is. Maybe they're Secret Service. I have no idea. That's not the point. And literally, Congress people were like passing through the hall as she's there at this barricade with a lot of other people. who had been chanting all day, remember, hang Mike Pence, and that they want to kill uh, Speaker Pelosi, and they wanted to kill, just any Democrat they could get their hands on. This was a violent insurrectionist mob of conspiracy theorists who had broken into the Capitol. Like, remember who we were talking about, who were actively fighting with Capitol Police. There are stories of one police officer who had been grabbed by the crowd and barely wasn't executed. This is a group of people clearly intending to do any violence they can to the people they hate, and those people are walking through the hall right now. Sorry, I'm sure that wasn't nice when I bumped the mic there. I don't know who broke through the barricade. There was like glass. Someone broke the glass, and Ashley Babbitt was starting to climb through when she was shot. It was the literal last line of defense before people could get to the Congress people. Now, maybe you could say like she couldn't do anything on her own, but they can't take that risk. They have no idea what arms she has. They have no idea, and like people might follow after, so on and so forth. This is the last line of defense to protect from someone like this. So when people pretend like so she was some martyr or whatever, no, she was a violent criminal who was actively engaged in an armed insurrection against the government, in protest of a fair election that they delusionally believe was stolen, barring, without any credible evidence. All of the evidence, in fact, has been discredited. Like, all of the claims of voter fraud have been disproven. Trying actively to attack, well, I was going to say elected representatives, but that shouldn't really matter. Attack people, trying to murder people. So no, she was actively engaged in actions that it's very justified that she was prevented in the way she was. In this case, shot dead, I should say. And the reason why they defend this, in part, is because they like it. They wanted that insurrection to work. Trump was very late in even requesting that the people go home, but was like on board with this. He had been stoking this fervor for quite a while, and there's a lot of discussion about this. I've already seen a documentary that came out about January 6th. There's a lot of discussion about this, but they will defend her because ultimately they were on board with what she was doing, and it's important not to forget that. They like it. They want the fascist coup. That's what they like.
He had no business doing that. He shot her.
He shot her because she was,
and actually, people
unarmed
say she was trying to hold
no.
back the people that were pushing her forward.
She wasn't.
Ashley Babbitt was the one that was killed. She was the one that was killed. And they like to say 5 people. That's the truth is. And there happened to be somebody else also in addition to Ashley. But Ashley Babbitt was a big supporter of everybody in this room. And by every account, she was an incredible person and a great patriot. And he shot her.
Called her a great patriot. Literally trying to murder elected representatives and overthrow the government, the legal vote, the illegal and fair election that had just occurred. Now, I say fair in American terms. There are a lot of things that make American elections very unfair, but as far as I know, all of those things work in favor of Republicans. If those things were done away with, it wouldn't have been even as close as it was, right? Biden won the popular vote by like millions of votes. It wasn't close. And that's among the people who were allowed to vote and yada yada, etc. There's a lot of stuff that makes things unfair, but in the way that this country is supposed to work, the only unfairness was in her favor, and in this case Trump's favor. But he just wants what's good for him, so he's okay with the overthrow of an election, irrespective of how credible it was. And it's important. Don't forget, this is who we're talking about. Trump is very much in favor, as he's saying here, of people overthrowing the government to put him in charge.
Just like he had no problem. And then they wanted to shield him, right? They wanted to shield. And he ends up on NBC, being interviewed on NBC because he was so proud of himself. He thought he was a big shot. And they ought to look at his past record, by the way. Take a look at his past record.
Now he wants his followers to figure out find anything they can on this guy and make his they're basically calling for harassment, right? to like dox and find and like now when he says look into it, the implication is like there's something to find. People will make up a thing they found, even if there's nothing. And everybody has something that like painted in the wrong way will make you look terrible to this kind of mob. There's also a tendency, as much as they fall in line, once somebody is no longer politically effective, or once somebody has like slighted them, they're very good at ripping each other apart, and he's asking for that to be pointed at someone who was protecting elected representatives from being literally murdered.
By the way, thank you for giving us Governor Kim Reynolds for governor of Iowa.
Good. That's right. I hate to say it, without me, you know she was not going to win. You know that, right? I gave you a couple of them. Without me, they wouldn't have won.
He loves to aggrandize
I
himself.
I gave you some good people. You have some good people here. But as far as the time, it's a great question because I've been watching DeSantis go out and say,
oh, here it is.
I've got 8 years. It's going to be 8 years. Let me tell you something. Right there, you should vote against him. It'll take me 6 months to have it totally the way it was. We'll have it fast.
Remember when he was gonna, remember his campaign promises before 2016 and how many of those things he didn't get done? This is just another. His supporters will believe literally anything. They believe everything. If you believe what Trump says, you'll believe anything because he's lying constantly. And so he knows he can just say whatever. People will like, I'll do this. Okay, sure, they'll believe it because you'll say the wall is completed and they believe it, even though it's demonstrably not. There's all sorts of this stuff. I don't want to get too much into it, but this is a tactic that's been discussed a lot previously. Fascists like to do this. Is you do a lot of little lies, so they'll believe the big lie. That's why the election fraud claim was called the big lie. It wasn't the first time that was used. That's a Hitler quote, if I'm not mistaken. Like Hitler talked about, you give them a lot of little lies, and once they start believing those, then you can do a big lie. Imagine believing bureaucrats. Well, a lot of people do, and the thing is, so I understand that. I understand that idea, Peachy Keen, but I do want to push back against it a little bit because that mindset is a little harmful because a lot of people do this conflation. I'm not saying that you do necessarily, but like the first step in this argument is always imagine believing. The politicians are all liars. It comes in a lot of flavors, and they'll conflate like every politician lies with therefore it's not different that Trump lies. This is kind of the whataboutism that well a lot of people do. Putin is pretty well known for, but Trump does also. There's a lot of this stuff. There is a quantitative and qualitative difference between the types of lies that different people will say. For example, if someone was talking about well, no, I won't give that example because that's another rabbit hole. Don't worry about the example. Trump is measured at, okay, hold on. Let's how is it fact check? So there are organizations that track how frequently politicians lie. I've seen this before. I hope I can find it. Okay, U.S. News and World Report has something. Okay, so here's an analysis. I want to find the actual. Is this one link? Is there a link to the? Oh, PolitiFact. That's what it was. Not fact check. It's PolitiFact. I knew I was forgetting. I knew that was wrong. They do analysis on the amount of lies politicians do. I've seen a graph for this before, but here, PolitiFact has been documenting Trump statements on our Truthometer, where they rated 76. So they have different scales, right? It's either mostly false, pants on fire. It's degrees of being wrong. Sometimes of it being false. There's not just a binary. They're lying to you or not. And 76% of the statements they were checking were at some level false. This is very different than sometimes a politician will say, like, make a campaign promise that they don't want, that they're not going to fulfill. This is a quantitative and qualitative difference. Remember, he also lied about election fraud to undermine the legitimacy of a democratic election, to put his dictatorship in control. That is a very different kind of lie. So while I understand, like, I don't want to feel like I'm coming down on you, Peachy Keen, because I appreciate that statement and like the feedback. I just want to warn against sentiments like that, because holy shit, is this not the same? That's a cool research. Can you see how much a bureaucrat lies compared to others? I've seen it before. I think there is. I would just check out PolitiFact. It's politifact.com. You can just go there and like. Uh, I've just been dismissing all bureaucrats equally. No, please do push it. Yeah, like okay. Well, I think I appreciate that, Peachy Keen. Yeah, there's PolitiFact is pretty good about this. They'll rate individual statements. I remember seeing stuff about how like comparing different people to, but like just look around. You can oh, here you can find people. Maybe this is yeah. Okay, so here you can see stuff like this, and you they might not have a direct comparison, but you could compare them. You could just pull up Trump versus Biden, and you can see so like what percentage of things, like, notice that the vast majority of what he says is false. Very little is even if you combine all of this, only 23% of what he says is even half true or more. Compare this to someone like Biden, who I'm sure has lied a significant amount. There's a lot of lies here, and this is bad. Don't get me wrong, this is really bad. We should demand more of our politicians, but this is very much different than the kind of lying we see from from well, people like Trump, open manipulators, fascists, authoritarians, people who don't care about the truth. That's another thing. The right tends not to actually care about what's true, and this will come up more and more as we talk about politics on this channel. I won't. We've already digressed a bit here, but this is very different. These numbers are very, very different than what we saw for Trump. Now, this is why the right, especially on Facebook and stuff, will start losing their minds over fact checking. They think that is disingenuous as a concept. They think it's like wrong as an idea, and the reason is because it shows all the people they like are lying. Because if it can't be true, otherwise they would be wrong, and that's something they can't abide. Like there's a lot of psychology that goes into the, like, well, being wrong is painful, so we'll do anything to avoid it, including denying reality, or it's just saying, like, oh, well, all fact checking is wrong. So how do you know anything about the world? Literally, like, it makes me wonder how they know anything about the world when every source is unreliable. The only sources they think are unreliable are the ones that feel right to them. And that's all it is. That's why it's very funny that Ben Shapiro is the facts don't care about your feelings guy, because to believe what he believes, you have to ignore facts. And you can see, like, they qualify what they mean by this. Even the mostly false, like, the statement contains elements of truth but ignores critical facts that would give a different impression. Even if we ignore those for Trump, you can see, what is this, 65%? Am I doing my math right? 55%, excuse me. 55% of what he says is completely wrong or worse. Like, even if we assume mostly false is like some degree of true, more than half of what he says is not. And that's a pretty big deal. And some of these lies are really, really bad. And we can see what some of these claims are, right? Like, completely false. They say Florida bill, election bill guts everything instead of getting tough and doing what people want. Same day voting, voter ID. And we can see, and they'll like go into like what makes this totally false. Yeah, adds rules for third party growth. It doesn't do, and you can go into the. I recommend reading a lot of these articles. I'm not going to get into now because it's tangents on top of tangents, but I would really recommend anybody who wants to be more educated about political claims and what's going on and what people say. go go really do some of this research on stuff like this. Oh, here's a pants on fire claim. I'm curious regarding Trump's 2021 telephone call with Georgia election officials. Nobody found anything wrong with that perfect phone call until a book promotion tour many months later. But no, obviously, like the the audio of that call is public. You can find it. It's very clear that he's asking for election fraud, and they go into that. So with that digression aside, actually, let's keep PolitiFact open and close the other thing. We can get into this. So yeah, I actually appreciate that you got me onto this tangent, Peachy Keen, because I think a lot of people do this where they just go, well, they all lie, but not all lies are the same, and not everyone lies the same amount or what kinds of lies. Uh, it's also one of those like if someone paints a little bit of an inaccurate picture, but that picture is more emblematic of what's true than the literal events, that can also be, a lie that does more good than the truth would do harm. There's a lot of I don't want to get too much into that. That one's a little harder a concept to swallow. I had trouble with that for a while. We'll get back to that another time. Let's just keep watching.
It's drilling, it's the wall, and it's getting criminals out of our country that have been allowed to come in so freely. We're going to get them out. ICE, we're going to double up on ICE and the border.
So there's this idea that this is another common myth that a lot of drugs come in through illegal immigrants. That's not really true. I'm sure some number of people do that, but immigrants of all kinds, on average, are far less likely to commit crimes than natural born citizens, and there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them that can be kind of intuitive for people who are surprised to hear that is like if you're an illegal immigrant, committing a crime is going to make it more likely that law enforcement will be looking for you. If you steal a car, well, maybe now because they're looking for that car, law enforcement will find you, and you don't just go to jail, you get deported. And so a lot of people are less interested in doing that. Not to mention that a lot of times with immigrants of any kind, they're trying to go to some place where they can make a better life. They're not trying to come someplace and just do a bunch of crimes. There's this view of the world where, well, out to get you specifically, and their only interest is hurting you, like the agents are. The agents don't really think; they just want to hurt you. But people have motivations, and those motivations often don't incentivize or disincentivize them from hurting others. And that's not like, even like people talk about like the home break-in where like you got to defend yourself. Home break-ins, people are usually looking to steal your stuff. They're not trying to just murder your family for no reason. But this idea of like, well, they're out to get me, and this is panic. Another tendency is that people on the right tend to be a lot more fearful, and so that's why this comes up. There's a lot more of a tendency in that direction, and that's why this kind of rhetoric works. Because they know you're like, yo, you're scared of immigrants. Let me give you more reasons to be scared of immigrants. Now vote for me. I'll do something about it. That's the basic strategy.
Border Patrol, they're incredible people. Brandon Judd and Tom Homan and some people that we have are phenomenal people, but they don't use the good ones. They use very liberal, very radical left people, and it's hard to believe.
One of the things I hate that Trump does, and I mean, obviously it's like, I don't know if he does it on purpose, and it's obviously like, okay, whatever. But the Republican Party too, is they'll call radical left things that are center left at most. They call Biden a socialist. Biden is very much not a socialist, but it makes it seem like the bounds of the left, as far left as you can go, is progressivism, but still neoliberalism. And it's a real problem for people further left than that. Some amount of it is intentional when the party at large does it. I think Trump is just, I don't know. I don't give him much credit for doing anything intentionally. He is a pretty unintelligent person by, like, I don't know. Anyone who pays attention to him any length of time makes it seem very clear how unintelligent he is, except for like a couple of things he's good at.
did hundreds of miles of wall. Then I said, you know, we should do more. What do you think? And they gave me other locations. We were going to add another 200 miles to it. We started, would have been done within a few weeks. And the stuff was all there. They actually lifted it
I
up and
love
took it.
this double talk. In his town hall on CNN, he said the wall was finished. Now he's talking about how now he's complaining how they wouldn't let him add more of the wall that was needed because it's not finished. I love it. But like Trump supporters won't ever care about that discrepancy. They won't even notice it.
Texas and Arizona can't get it. Can you believe it? Instead of saying, you guys put it up yourself, at least. But they didn't want it up. That's when I said, these guys actually believe in open borders.
Oh,
Who
and if you
can
ever want
believe
like
in
a full like fever dream experience, read a transcript of a Trump speech like this. Like or even if you're watching, just write down the words word for word, take yourself away from his affectation and then read it back. It's insane. The like the where he goes, it kind of works because you're like you're trying to follow his flow and like how he talks, but he changed subject like 4 times in this sentence.
border. But when I heard DeSantis go out and say
DeSantis.
And talk about 8 years, we need 8 years. You don't need 8 years. You need 6 months. We can turn this thing around so quickly. If you need 8 years, who the hell wants to wait 8
I'm watching
years?
right now. I'm lost.
You don't need
Yeah.
8 years.
A lot of times if you get lost, don't worry about it. He's not saying anything. It's really not like head empty, dude. Like there's no it's not like there it's a combination of try to read it more like whatever his motivations here, and it's he's trying to make himself seem good with this thing, complain about the way people were fighting him, get mad at Ron DeSantis, as it were, about this, and like make himself seem better. You know, it's all of these like I don't know feelings, I guess, are just like and motivations are vying for each other, and like they all seem a little bit relevant. And while I might do something like get to each in turn or like digress because there's additional thoughts past this one, he'll just pack them all into the same sentence and jump between them, and he'll like start a thought and then mostly finish it just to like do it a little bit more on feel than on words. Notice more what he's trying to do than what he's saying. It helps a little bit.
I'll have it turned around, and I think fully turned around. We'll be drilling, and we'll be.
And he says, "I'll have it turned around." What do you even mean? What it are you referring to? It just he wants to is again that idea of like things are bad, I'll fix it. This is another thing. If you're, I've noticed since you mentioned that you are politically ignorant. One of the things I'll mention is that there is a tendency, like one of the core features of fascism is the idea that we were once a great people that have fallen, and I can make us better again. And this is the Make America Great rhetoric. This is the exact same. I don't know what he was referring to here because he's so lost in the jumble that it's impossible to keep track of anything. But the point is, it was bad. It is bad. It used to be good. It is bad. I'll make it good again. That's all he's trying to impart. And this is why also I'm glad for the people who are lost. This is one of the things that I will never understand. How Trump supporters say Biden has dementia. Have you listened to this guy talk? He makes zero sense. He's actively changing subjects multiple times in a sentence to the point where none of it flows together at all. This guy is nothing, like, he's so addled, but Biden, who can form a complete sentence, it's just a little slow, is the one with dementia. I have no idea. Also, Trump's only like 4 years younger than Biden. They're not terribly, they're both ancient.
Be doing a lot of things. We'll be energy independent in 6 months. We'll be able to do that in 6 months.
Oh,
Don't
sure,
forget,
yeah.
I filled up the
Yeah, I
National
bet.
Reserves. I did a lot of things at very cheap prices. Congress held me back, actually. But
Complaining
we had a deal
about
I was going to fill it up for
people
nothing. You know, when
working
the oil was
against him.
down so low because we had so much of it. We have more liquid gold under our feet than Saudi Arabia and Russia. Think of it. We have more than
Is that true? Is that true? Probably not, right? Let's just do a quick check. Uh, well, he's talking about how much there is, not how much we produce. All right, I don't care enough. He's probably making shit up, right? Can we just assume that at this point? Have we established this guy lies more than he doesn't?
The country, we were going to double up on them. We were not only going to be dominant, we were going to be beyond dominant. We were going to be bigger than Russia and Saudi Arabia ×2. We were going to make
Sure,
a fortune
buddy.
with energy.
6
We
months.
were going to
yeah.
start paying off debt and further reducing taxes. It was so beautiful. It was working
So
so
the
great.
tax reductions that
And then they
he
just
often
shut it all
talks
down.
about having
So a
done
shame. But
don't go
it's
to
not
most
8 years,
people.
it's
They're
6
to like
months.
the
And
top
we'll be back.
1% or whatever. People like him, the rich. So like, it's this trick that the right often pulls where they pretend like, look, we did all these taxes, that's good for you, but your taxes didn't change. It's just the people who make all the money, and therefore most of the money we need to fund public services is now gone.
We'll be back in business, and sooner than that. And we'll be back in business, and those tractors are going to be spending a lot less money for their energy, and the food prices are going to start coming down, and a lot of things are going to start coming down. It'll be a beautiful thing to watch. It's
That's
going to
another
happen very
thing, in
quickly.
case you're not aware. Inflation, especially with food prices, was blamed on Biden a lot. However, it's been shown pretty clearly that the prices, especially for food that have gone up, have been unnecessary from an inflation perspective, but they just wanted to make more money, and so they just kept the prices up, or like inflation went up X% and they made 3 times X% in profit. It's like they're going up disproportionately. It has nothing to do with the administration, except for the fact that we don't have enough trust busting. Boy, do we need another Teddy Roosevelt trust buster. Let me tell you.
And I'm very experienced now. It's not like I'm going in. Not like I'm going in and say, "Oh, this is a nice office. Is this the Oval Office?" It takes you about a year to sort of say, "Can you believe this? This is the Oval Office." I won't have to say that. We're going to do it very quickly. And
remember
I
when he
think
used to be like, "I'm an outsider. That makes me better. I'm not a career politician." Now he's like, "I've been in there before, so I'm used to it." Who you gonna call? Trust buster. Okay, I like that. All right, good. All right, you got me, Amazon King. Good stuff.
6 months, you're going to see a major part of the comeback. Not 8 years. He'll stop saying that. Watch. He's going to stop saying that, because if he needs 8 years to turn it around, he's saying, "Well, I'm going to, I can be." Let me tell you, I'll go 4 years, and if I do a great job, we're going to have a great Republican. Somebody is going to go another 4 years or 8 years. So it doesn't make any difference. But when he says,
I think what he wanted to say there, because that sentence doesn't really make a lot of sense. Of like, somebody will go, like, why would you start this sentence to be like, oh yeah, and then someone else will come in? I think he wants significantly more than that. He talked about running for a third term previously, and I think it's just the matter of like he's too much associated with armed insurrection and coups. Sorry, I got a fiddle. I was picking at a scab and I accidentally cut myself, so I'm like bleeding. So that's why that's why I keep looking down. Sorry about that. That's my dedication to the stream, to you, the viewer. I'll fight through the pain. In any case, I think what he wanted to say is, I'll have another 4 more years, or I'll have another 8 more years, because he wants to be president for life. He's envious of Xi Jinping. He is on record as praising him for being an emperor, and she's like, "No, I'm not an emperor." He's like, "Hey, you're president for life. You're basically emperor." And Trump wants the same.
years, every time I hear it, I wince, because I say,
Actively
if it
anti-democracy.
takes 8 years to turn this around, then you don't want him. You don't want him as your president. You ought to go to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th guys, but they're usually polling at about 1%. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, well, we'll do one more. Go ahead. Go ahead. Hi.
Hi, President Trump.
How are you?
I just graduated high school 2 weeks
Wow,
ago.
great.
Thank you. And so
Oh, don't
my
say that.
question for
You're in a
you-
room full of Republicans. You're going to be preyed upon like, oh my God. And they're going to swoop down around you. In 10 minutes, you're going to be surrounded by 60-year-old dudes trying to get in there.
is since your last term in office, there have been a lot of attacks on education in terms of censorship and all of that. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on parental control and that kind of thing within schools, school choice, and
Yeah.
all of that. Education is very important to me, so wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
So
Thank
big,
you.
very good question. Congratulations, by the way. Good. Were you a good student? Were you good? Pretty good. Okay, just pretty good.
She just got a $180,000 scholarship, a naval
Oh, wow.
scholarship to go to Yale.
Wow. Ooh,
Wow, good for her.
She's
Maybe
very
they'll
modest.
actually teach her something
She's
as
very
opposed
modest.
to
That's fantastic.
this indoctrination
That's great.
she's clearly been
Congratulations.
in on the other
very
end.
big on school choice. Can you imagine we even have to talk about parental control and basically having parents get involved. We have school systems that don't even want to talk to the parents about their children. And
Well, that's
you
because a
talk
lot of
about
these parents are
changing-
absolutely deranged, right? Now that there's been this hysteria about CRT and wokeism and shit, there are just parents who are screeching at the wind about they don't want CRT in schools. For those of you who don't know, CRT, critical race theory, isn't taught outside of like law school kind of thing. Maybe you'll get a little bit in college courses, but this is not a thing taught in schools. What they mean is any education that makes it seem like races great cathode ray team. You know what? Fair. I remember those TVs cathode ray team. No, critical race theory. But what they mean by it is very different, right? There was this huge campaign, intentional campaign. The guy who started is on record as saying that he intentionally manufactured this hysteria about it. But what they use that to be like, oh, you taught my kid that slavery was a thing. That's critical race theory. You're indoctrinating our kids and telling them that white people are worse. That's how you get things. This is how you get school boards who don't want to deal with parents because they're just going off about absolute nonsense. And in fact, I don't think it was. They did it. I don't think they accomplished it yet. But if I remember correctly, I think it was last year, Texas Republicans put out their platform, and it included the removal of CRT in schools, and by that I mean teaching about slavery at all. They wanted to not teach that slavery happened. And this is the kind of thing, like, this is why these hysterias are dangerous, and also why school boards with any sort of backbone just don't want to deal with batshit parents, because it's not parents, it's not progressive parents who are doing this. Progressive parents don't go in there and complain that, like, you're not teaching that white people are bad. That doesn't happen. What does happen is you get the fervor riled up by manufactured hysterias and culture war nonsense to get reactionary parents screaming about this kind of stuff instead.
Gender and things where the child can make a choice, and the child can
Imagine
be
the child making a choice.
unbelievably young. The country has
Imagine
gone
children
sick.
making choices.
It's gone sick. And I don't like the term woke because I hear woke. You know, it's like just a term that half the people can't even define it. They don't know what it is.
So, just as a note, this is like pushback against DeSantis. It's just kind of hidden because he's not mentioning DeSantis, as it were. But remember, Ron DeSantis has staked his entire campaign basically on anti-wokeism. Like, he's the anti-woke guy. Half of the bills in this state, it's to the point where he had to legally define it in court. His lawyers had to like write a definition of what they mean by woke because it's so much a part of what he does. So he's just saying like, oh, people don't even know what it means. It's just anti-DeSantis. Now, the idea that people don't know what it means and that he can use it to mean whatever he wants is partially the point. It's so he can push back against whatever the fuck he wants. It's so you can have these book bans in schools, and you can say like you don't you can have people being sued for watching Strange World, for showing Strange World in a classroom, even though it's PG and the parents consented to their kids watching PG movies. You know, this is how that kind of stuff happens. It means you can almost at this point substitute in woke for degeneracy when DeSantis uses it. Honestly, it's like we're getting pretty close to that point, and that's basically what he means.
But you look at these things like women getting, competed with, men that were men and are men. And
doesn't
they're out
happen.
there
What he's
swimming
talking
and
about, of
setting-
course, is trans women participating in sports. Now, the number of trans women who do this is incredibly small. Even if it wasn't, it doesn't really matter. Most of the time, so there's a concern, right, that on average, people who have androgen sensitivity, which males tend to, we'll get back to that, have a bit of a musculature advantage, or like have a greater musculature than people who don't have androgen sensitivity. However, if people go on puberty blockers and don't ever go through male puberty and instead only go through female puberty because they transition, then they are, as I understand it, biologically indistinguishable from men on from males on a musculature basis. Or sorry, indistinguishable from women, from cis women. I'm getting my terms mixed up. I'm very sorry. Um, that said, there may be a discussion of like, well, if you've had an androgen sensitivity, but a lot of times when people who transition later in life, they don't want to compete in women's events because the point of competition is competition. It should be a struggle, a challenge. I'm thinking in particular of one instance where there's this weightlifter who people were getting all up in an uproar about her competing against women, and she's like, no, I don't compete against women. I compete against men, because she understands that not only did she benefit from male puberty, but she worked out and did a lot of strength training before transition, and she wants to compete on a playing field where it is actually a competition. But even like that, all that aside, you know that the issue isn't actually when the women's sports thing, for a number of reasons. One in particular is they only get mad when the trans people win. And so and some people who are like, "Oh, I'm okay with it," except they won in this case, really aren't okay with it. I don't know. I'm getting off topic, and I'm like thinking about all these other stories, but it's just like that's how they bait. I got baited. He does this all the time. They do this all the time on the right, where it's just like, we'll mention a thing that's fractally wrong, and then if you start to answer it, you get off topic and like you're not really addressing anything. So I'm gonna stop that thought violently and then proceed with this video.
Records. You see the records that are being broken? Records that lasted for 19 years are being broken by, 30 seconds. They're trying to win by a 16th of a second in swimming on one of the events.
I remember this story coming up. If I remember correctly, this is like completely not true, but I mean, something worth discussing is whether a gender division in sports really makes sense. And people talk about like, oh, there's biological advantages. I mean, lots of people have biological advantages. That's what sports often come down to. Like I said, Michael Phelps has an abnormally large wingspan. Biologically, he has an advantage against everyone else in like his height and build. He just has longer arms, and they help him swim. And these kinds of things are often not the thing we care about. The thing they actually care about is like, look at these degenerates engaging in normal activities. That's what they don't like, all right? And that they're winning is like this show of, it is something that makes the people like, oh, I shouldn't say, I was going to say people like this, but for clarity, transphobes, very uncomfortable, because it makes the trans people look strong and the transphobes look weak. It's just about that. It's just degeneracy and weakness. They don't actually care about the events.
A 16th of a second. They're trying to win for years. And a guy comes along and breaks the record by, numbers that will never be broken again, unless you have another guy come along, and then he'll probably have it broken. The whole thing is crazy. I'm not a fan of LeBron James, but I said,
Of course he's not. You're not.
If I were the coach of a women's basketball team, I would have the greatest team. I'd say, LeBron, would you like to become a woman?
And he would say no, because that's not how transition works.
And I'd go to another 4 or 5 big guys, and I'll say, how about we will be undefeated for many, many years.
Also, you really think, like, goes back to the competition thing. LeBron James has been argued to be, I don't follow basketball enough to say definitively. I've heard people argue that he's the greatest basketball player of all time so far. Do you really think he wants to step away from that goal, from like defining himself in that way, maybe getting more championship? They get rings for basketball, right? I'm not actually sure, but like winning more championships, all this other. Do you think he wants to step away from that to participate in women's sports so he can get easy wins? He's possibly the greatest of all time where he is. Why would he want to like step into what's supposed to be weaker competition? And I'm not even necessarily, well, probably they're like different rules in women's basketball. The point is, like, it makes it very clear, obviously that's not how people work or how people think. People want to compete, not to step into competitions where they have such an enormous advantage that they couldn't lose. Now, that said, I also feel like I'm acting like women couldn't beat men in competitive sports. That's not necessarily true. It depends on the type of sport. But there are a lot of advantages that people who've gone through male puberty have over people who haven't. So, it's just something to factor in.
Never be anything like it. I'll go down as the greatest coach in history. They'll say I was the greatest ever.
I mean,
no,
will
it's so
they? 'Cause
crazy. And that's all woke. That's
nobody,
all I guess.
because
they
like
define that as
especially
woke.
on the right, people didn't give a single shit about women's sports until trans women wanted to participate in them. I don't think anyone will say you're the greatest coach of all time. I think people will be like, women's sports, who cares? Which like it's a problem in itself, but like obviously this is delusional.
But that's all woke. We have to bring common sense back into the country. People say, oh, you're conservative. I said, yeah, I'm conservative. But more important is I'm a person with common sense, and so are the people in this room. And our country needs common sense back in leadership. We had great
Common sense, by the way,
years.
nonsense concept. I know it's a thing that feels like it makes sense, but honestly, when people say common sense, you can translate that to, I can't defend my position, and you're wrong for challenging it, because everyone knows I'm right. But oftentimes, things that people defend with common sense are indefensible.
Years, and we produced the greatest economy ever. I rebuilt our military. I mean, the $85 billion was
rebuilt
massive,
it. Yeah,
but
it was
just
completely
a small
gone.
portion
Didn't
of
have the
what we
biggest
rebuilt.
military in the world.
It was a massive amount, but a small portion. But when you look at what we did at the border, when you
Whatever
look
happened
at
to
what
his
we did
Space
in
Force?
every single aspect, even Right to Try, where we had for 58 years they've been trying to get this, where we have very far-reaching drugs that were good, but they're not approved by the FDA, and somebody's terminally ill. And we couldn't get the drugs. They'd go to Asia, or if they're poor, they just go home and they die. They have no hope. But they'd go to Europe.
I mean,
they'd go
like you
all
give
over
a
the
single
world
shit
looking
about
for
the poor.
something. And I signed a bill, very hard to get, actually very complicated, because the drug companies didn't want it, the labs didn't want it, the doctors
Look at
didn't
how
want
many
it because,
subject
they
changes.
thought they had
Like how many digressions has he had in this one sentence? It's insane to me. But no. Biden's the dementia-addled one. Okay,
I signed
all right,
a
buddy.
non-liability clause. I got it approved, and everybody's happy. We've saved, with Right to Try, we've saved thousands and thousands of lives of people that are terminally ill. And people would say, well, we can't do that because they may die. I said, they're going to die anyway. And yet they were in there for close to 60 years now trying to get that approved. And I got it approved through Congress. I got it approved. You had to go through Congress on that one. And we're
I'm just
saving
not gonna
lives,
respond to it.
tremendous
Doesn't mean
numbers of
relevant.
lives. I'm very proud of that one, Right to Try. It sounds easy. You'd think it would be easy to get it approved, actually, but it was very, very tough. Gone for many, many years. I took care of the vets better than anybody. We had a 92% approval rating.
Now he's just
And
gonna.
now
So
it's
now
going-
this is. Remember, try to listen to this in terms of the motivations he has and what he's trying to do. He's just trying to make it. He's just aggrandizing himself because he is an egomaniac. The only thing, or I shouldn't say the only, like his number one drive, the chief thing that makes him do everything he does is making himself seem good and others seem bad, which makes him seem good, and getting people to like him and agree that he is good. So that's why he's like bragging about all these things. They may not be true, but this is also why he complains about people working against him and why they're bad, and why he likes Ashley Babbitt, who was fighting for him. It's just me good. That's the number one thought. I wouldn't be like, honestly, if you peer into his brain, I would expect it's just on loop: me good, me good, me good, me good, and that's all he's got.
Way down, I understand.
Every so
But
often
we,
it'll be them bad, me
we
good,
had
me
a
good,
lot of
them bad.
bad people in the VA, and you weren't able to fire them because of civil service and various other reasons. And I got that taken care of, and we let go of 9,000 really bad people. And I also, people were waiting in line for
What do you mean?
literally months. And some people were becoming terminally ill because they couldn't get something taken care of early. And I said,
I'd like to note that this hasn't changed at all. The medical system in this country is a huge problem, but as much as he'll complain about this, he doesn't have a solution. There are solutions on the table, things like Medicare for all, or universal health care, or even something like Obamacare was an attempt. It was insufficient, but it is better than what we had for sure. But American healthcare is terrible because in a lot of the ways that he's describing, but he doesn't want to fix that. He just wants to complain about it being bad.
you wait in line, and you have to wait in line for more than 24 hours. You go outside to a private doctor. We pay the bill, and you get yourself taken care of. We went up to and it actually saved money, as opposed to you'd think it would cost. It actually saved a lot of money. But when you think of it, we did things that nobody's ever done.
Oh, and if anyone ever asks you, oh, like universal healthcare is so expensive, can we really afford it to? There are two answers. One, can we afford not to? People are literally dying. And two, just yeah, well, I guess that's the better answer. But you could also just remind people like the money is still being spent. It's just being spent instead of by taxpayer money, it's being spent by the taxpayers directly. The amount we spend on medical care in this country is enormous. It just doesn't come out of the government's purse. It comes out of yours.
With the VA, we had a 92% approval rating. Nobody has ever been. We were 36, I think, 36 points higher than previous. So we're very proud of what we did for the vets.
He got so mad at someone who's like ostensibly on his side because she like misquoted a number. She says he was like 24 points ahead of DeSantis in some state, and he like went on a screed on Truth Social about like this fake news person who's bad and terrible and hates liberty. I'm actually up by 32 points or whatever. Like lost his goddamn mind over this. Like this is what I mean. Any slight is enough for him to rip into it. Like the only thing in this, I want to I really want to focus on this because there are a lot of people who are the one of the good ones types. The people like Blair White is a great example, who be like, oh, the right likes me or whatever, but they like you only as long as you are useful. The moment they think that you've turned against them, even if it's really small, even if you didn't really, there's no peace. This is another tendency, well, of the right in general, but like fascism in particular, where you narrow the pyramid at the top. Who is us gets smaller and smaller, and they're just looking for reasons to throw out people who would compete with them with power. DeSantis was like Trump's fucking buddy of like last year or 2 years ago, but now he hates him because he's opposed to him. But they're vying for who will control the reins of power. There's no safety in your position, even if you're liked on the right, because as soon as you do something they don't like, that's it, you're gone.
For the military and what we did for the farmers. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and we have a nasty race ahead of us because we have the communists, the Marxists, the fascists after us. We have
no, the fascists like you.
We have a lot of very bad people in this country, and we have, fortunately,
that's another thing is they'll pretend like the fascist doesn't believe in words, and what people mean by fascism, they'll try to conflate with communism. Communism and fascism are two very different things. They're, in fact, often opposed. The first camp that the Nazis built was to throw socialists in. They are not on the same side. Now, Stalin did ally with Hitler, but I would argue that Stalin was not a communist. He was a fascist, or at the very least an authoritarian. The workers didn't own the means of production. That's a big deal. But they'll conflate these things.
People in this country, and really the people in this room, right from the beginning, we struck a chord. I didn't even have to work too hard with that.
We're not going to get anything else out of this. One thing I want to talk about a little bit, because it was reminded here. I just want because I talk about the right and the left a lot, and I think I want to clarify what I mean by these terms. In large part, I just want the image, thank you. In large part because I think people have different ideas of what it means, and while I'm not going to claim to be, I'm not going to say like, oh, I'm the only one who has a correct definition, even though I am. I at the very least want to like make my terms clear as to what I'm talking about. Oh, good. Okay, yeah. Some people in chat are also confused by what people mean by this, and so hopefully I can elucidate a little bit better. And if people have disagreements with this, please let me know. I'm not going to claim to be the most correct on this. I don't exactly have a political science degree or anything like that. However, the difference between authoritarianism and libertarianism should be pretty straightforward. That's a thing I think a lot of people have an understanding of, but I'll go over really quickly. Authoritarianism tends to consolidate power into the hands of very few, and the ability to wield the mechanisms of political force, right? This is why the like peak of authoritarianism, you'll have a single person in charge. You'll have a dictator or whatever else. Now that isn't necessarily right or left, according to breakdowns like this, but I'll get to my disagreement with that in a moment. Um, um, I'm not sure what you mean, Peachy Keen, by one is more collective and the other is more individual. Do you mean like in terms of power, that libertarian is more collective and that authoritarian is more individual? I'm not exactly sure because there's also a lot of bad information out there what people mean by collectivism versus individualism, which I think is a nonsense discussion. So I'm curious what you mean by that. The left versus the right, in my view, at the very least, is about egalitarianism versus hierarchy. The further you go right, the more you have a tendency towards these people should be in charge. They have their place. Uh, one is better than the other. You have a monarchy is a pretty good example. This is a pretty this was like the original left and right. As I understand it, the reason why we call them left and right has to do with I think it's French politics. I could be mistaken, but there was something like the monarchists stood on the right and the anti-monarchists stood on the left. The further you go left, the further you're gonna get into egalitarianism, where you disseminate the oh, I think I actually explained authoritarian libertarianism in a way that I disagree with now. Authoritarianism would be more like the restrictions and confinement an individual will face. A libertarian will be more free to do things, whereas where someone in an authoritarian system will be less free to do things. They'll be more bound by obligation. Sorry, I mix up why I don't get to that immediately. Whereas the left versus right is egalitarianism versus hierarchy in general. The right is very big on hierarchy. They love it. They think it's a good thing. Whereas on the farthest you go left, you actually get anarchism, which is another idea that is often misunderstood because for the last 150 years or so, it's been intention. Well, I don't know about intentionally, but it has been misdefined. The original our anarchist writers were not writing about lawlessness, which I think a lot of people use anarchy to mean. A system or a situation without law or governance where people can do whatever they want. This is not what anarchists were talking about in terms of their writings. Anarchy is without rulers, and without archy, it is like ruler. A monarch is the one ruler. Anarchy would be a system without rulers whatsoever. If full egalitarianism, nobody has more power than another. The tenets of anarchy, as I understand them, is that there is an assumption that all hierarchy is illegitimate unless it demonstrates that it is not. And so, as opposed to a situation on the right where all hierarchy is considered to be legitimate, and you would have to demonstrate why it is illegitimate. And in anarchy, the other tenet, as I recall it, is the abolition of unjust hierarchies. With those two together, you maximize egalitarianism. Most people have, or it should be the case that everyone has equal political power to everyone else, like actually equal political power, not in the way we talk about it in, for example, our system, where everybody, in theory, has the right to vote, and that has equal political power, except in the electoral college, where if you live in a certain place, you have more or less political power based on the number of electoral votes, or if you're an elected representative, you have more political power than the people who aren't. Even though you are supposed to be beholden to the whims of the constituency, people end up not being. And so the reason why I don't think that this 4x4 is really correct is just because I don't know what it would mean to maximize egalitarianism and minimize freedom. That doesn't really make sense. Nor does it really make sense to maximize freedom and also maximize hierarchy. Oh, I notice I'm pointing with my cursor, but you guys can't see my cursor, I don't think. Hopefully you understand where I'm talking about on this chart. This is why a lot of times ANCAPs are just completely nonsensical. Nothing they say works together. There's a lot of assumptions about about like authority without authorities. It's very strange. This is why I don't think there's actually a quadrant system. I think it is just a left-right divide, and the further right you go, the more you get hierarchy, rigidity, and ultimately authoritarianism. And the further left you go, the more you get freedom, equality, and egalitarianism. Is there a singular trait that separates the axis of right and left? I would say hierarchy versus egalitarianism, as opposed to freedom versus obligation. So a good example of that is like progression along the right is that a democracy has more egalitarianism, more individual, more of a divestment of power to the people and less of a collection than something like a monarchy. A monarchy, all of the power is held by the monarch, and then less to like the dukes and the duchesses, and then less to the counts or whatever. However, the structure works. A caste system is very similar, where you have the further down you go, the more people there are generally, and the fewer rights and generally less political power they have. This is also where you get the tendency on the right to have an interest in. There's usually conceptually two groups: a group that the law binds but does not protect. This would be the underclass. If you think of a feudal society, if you're just a random peasant, you are required to pay taxes, but the lord can just kill you if they want. And then the other group would be the group to which the law a group which the law protects but does not bind. The lord is not obligated to, is free to kill you if they want, but they are protected by the fact that you are required to pay them taxes. This is usually done through force in a feudal system, but this can be done in a lot of ways. Whereas democracy is further left. Democracy, everybody gets the vote. A democratic republic would be further right than something like a full democracy, a direct democracy. I was looking for the term there. And then you start getting further into libertarianism when it's and further left and further libertarian when you have things like anarchism. I don't think that the distinction between these two axes is all that real. If I were going to reshape it, it would be less like this and more like this. Maybe there are some edge cases where people can be a little less authoritarian but still right wing, or a little more authoritarian than left wing, but these tend to be pretty anomalous, and I think in a lot of cases not legitimately left or right in that way. Okay, I see. So no one axis divides power equally versus consolidating it. The axis that does is the left and the right. If you maximize leftism, you should have complete egalitarianism. And if you maximize rightism, which isn't really a term people use, but if you maximize right-wing thinking, you will have one god emperor over everybody, This is also why people talk about how capitalism is kind of an inherently contradictory system with democracy, because capitalist structures are built like this. You have the CEO at the top, and then then you have the top executives, then the middle managers, then the workers, and they have a similar amount of power to that same structure in something like a monarchy. It is built to consolidate power into one individual, and the mechanisms of capitalism are also built to consolidate power across businesses. This is why you have conglomerations and mergers into mega corporations as kind of an inevitable process that keeps happening. This isn't, by the way, we see a lot of large corporations now. This isn't the first time that this has happened. It is the first time that's happened on this scale. But one of the reasons I mentioned Teddy Roosevelt, Lucy, was trust busting, because this was happening constantly. There was vertical integration and horizontal monopoly and all these sorts of things. A lot of concepts that were named in that time for what these companies were doing. There is a system built to do that. This is why a lot of times people on the left are opposed to capitalism, because ultimately it is antithetical to egalitarianism. This also is why. Well, I guess this isn't really related, but it's something that I wanted to talk about because I realized it earlier. One of the issues with the Democratic Party is where it lands on this chart. I guess we'll segue into that because while the right is, I can't point without the. All right, hold on. All right, I'm gonna change my view here. Give me 1 second. All right, because I want you all to see what I'm pointing at. You can see my cursor, right? I'll give you a second to let me know. Isn't capitalism egalitarian because it's anyone trade equally in an ideal world? No, not at all. So you have equal right to trade, but you don't have equal access to trade. The reason why it's not egalitarian is exactly that structure I was talking about. Ultimately, one person amasses and collects wealth and power. Successes lead to more successes. If you have a successful company and therefore a lot of money, you can make another successful company because you have the starting capital and you can accrue from there. While in theory, everyone has equal access to the market, but you don't have equal means within that market. You have unequal power. It's kind of like a democracy wherein, like, if let's say when America was founded, instead of only rich landowning white men could vote, it was landowning white men got 3 votes, and landowning men got 2 votes, and men got 1 vote, and women got, or we'll start with 4, right? 4, 3, 2, and then women get 1 vote. Everyone has access to the polls, but not everyone has equal power at the polls. And the same is true with capitalism. The more wealth you have, the more economic power you have, and it is designed and built, maybe unintentionally, to accrue wealth in fewer and fewer hands. As of right now, I think it's something like 6 people, not 6%, 6 individual human beings own more wealth than the bottom 50% of humanity, or they own like half of all money or something ridiculous like that. That kind of accrual is built into the system, and that is very much anti-egalitarianism. Now I know we're always taught like, oh, capitalism's fair, but like at the end of the day it isn't. If you wanted to start a business, like you yourself personally, Peachy Keen, if you wanted to start a business right now, and Elon Musk wanted to start a business right now, and it was the same business, who is more likely to do well and to succeed? Probably the guy worth literal billions of dollars, right? And not you, who I assume has less than that. There's a lot of appearance of equality that doesn't actually exist. Yeah, so I'm hoping that you can see where my cursor is, because I was getting back to what I was talking about. The American Republican Party is, well, somewhere in this quadrant. I was gonna gesture here, but they are shifting further and further towards the fascism. And in fact, there's a lot of like, well, I shouldn't say a lot of. I have seen openly monarchist sentiments becoming more openly discussed than what would have been than what was discussed something like 10, 20 years ago. Though I guess maybe I was less aware of those sentiments. The problem is, one, the Democratic Party is also in this quadrant, or maybe around here. And part of the issue is this like bounds the scopes of like what the right will call far left exists right here, but what people like me want is all the way down here. But this is so far out of the discussion, it ends up not being possible. And this is the idea of like kind of controlled opposition. That they're not really. The Democratic Party operates independently, kind of, and there are a lot of problems there. What would that world even look like? Well, there are a lot of difficulties with that because there's a lot of stuff that is hard to imagine, just in the sense of there are issues and solutions to those issues that are hard to imagine. But I'll try to paint you a general scope. But the idea would be, for one, you would have ideally not capitalism. Ideally something like socialism. Socialism tends to be in the green quadrant here. This is where you would have the workers owning the means of production, the two things in my mind, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, that typify socialism, as socialists talk about it, is worker ownership of the means of production. That means when you are employed by a business, you are an owner of that business. You have rights that come with ownership, and there and that is the sole means of ownership. People cannot. So that's a second tenet. Ownership it is not a it does not have an independent access to wealth in the way it does now. What I mean is people can right now work for a living or own for a living. If you are, for example, a landlord, someone who owns properties, maybe you pay someone to manage those properties, but you are getting paid by your tenants simply for access to the thing you own. You don't actually have to do anything. Same thing with business owners, or if you own stock, you are making money from merely owning a thing and not contributing in any meaningful way towards productivity or towards anything that's useful. That doesn't mean that the moment you stop working, you are done away with. There should be social safety nets, and additionally, it should be more possible for you to have access to toward the means of survival without work because of the work that you've contributed. You know, there are a lot of things that go into this. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here. And the third thing that typifies socialism, at least to my understanding, is democracy in the workplace. Just like we have democracy in our governmental system, in theory, we ought to have democracy in our workplace. The reason being, there are a lot of reasons for this, but the most obvious is you spend about 8 hours of your day at this place of business. But that place of business is an authoritarian system wherein you have a boss who has a boss who has a boss, and you follow orders that you're given to you by them following orders that are given to them, and so on and so forth. And you have no means of you have no access to control of the business in any way into your work environment. So something that very obviously, like a very easy thing to like wrap your head around as to something that we might vote on is, let's say your company starts to make maybe the profit goes up by 10%. Currently, that just means the top executives and the shareholders make 10% more money, or however it gets divvied up. They make the majority of that. But maybe you could vote that money should be reinvested into the company, or maybe you can vote that you should get a wage increase of like 5% and the rest gets put in. Or a better example, maybe technology comes out that makes the amount of work required to do the same job a lot less. For example, what if trucking gets automated? Maybe instead of all those truckers simply losing their jobs, maybe they could vote for fewer hours and doing something else. This kind of thing where you have access to make your voice heard for the problems that come up. This is part of it. So socialism would almost certainly be a requisite for something in the green zone. Maybe not socialism, but like something resembling that. These things need to be factored in. There are a lot of ideas that exist in this love zone, and I encourage you to go seek out more information about this from people who are better to learn this from. I mean, in particular, the theorists who wrote about these things like anarchism, socialism, even the differences between communism and socialism. Karl Marx, it turns out, was kind of a smart dude. But I don't want to get too much into that. The other things that like you might see in the left libertarian quadrant is you would see probably more direct democracy that doesn't have things like the electoral college, which skews the impact of votes. Maybe you'd have there are different kinds of voting that are actually more egalitarian than the way we vote right now. And what I mean by that is we currently have first past the post voting, which means the first person to get 51% of the vote is if you get 51% of the vote, you have won the election. But there are other ways of doing it. What if you have like ranked choice voting? That would be putting more hands in the people to make their voices heard, because now you can say, all right, I want, for example, Bernie Sanders to win the primary, but if he doesn't get enough votes, my next pick would maybe be like AOC. I don't know if she can even run. And then maybe my next vote is Biden. And you can and then you don't just have to vote for the person you think is most likely to win. You vote for the person you are most in line with, and if that person doesn't win, then the next in line, and that is a method by which you can make your voice even more heard than how we do it now. There are lots of things like this. I just want to paint like a vague idea. I know it's hard to imagine like this completely different world, and so much so that I don't think what exists in my brain is necessarily what it would look like or what it should look like. It's more to give you an idea of how far things can go from what is presented as possible, because a lot of things just are permuted out of the conversation by assuming the totality of political thought exists in this little area right here. But there's a lot that goes beyond that, and this is why people who are like democratic socialists or social democrats, soc dems and dem socs appropriately, are called socialists. That's why we refer to socialist countries like Norway. They're not socialist. They're democratic socialists. They might be closer to here, or maybe here. I don't know exactly what their politics looks like, but like at least on a economics in an economic sense, they are more left leaning than we are, and that is more stuff that you can like look into as well. I love it. I've already learned more about the left versus right, which is always confusing. Yeah, because a lot of times it's like it's by feel, right? Like people just gesture vaguely towards the left or the right. How do people justify left versus right, egalitarian, not egalitarian? So a lot of times it's people don't want to talk about it in those terms, but they'll talk about they won't talk about the egalitarianism aspect. They'll talk about hierarchy. Jordan Peterson's a good person to look to for this. He has gone on at length about the necessity and importance of hierarchy as a concept. But hierarchy, definitionally and by design, places additional power at the top and reduced power at the bottom, which means it's very much more of a right-wing thing, which is why he says, oh, I'm not right-wing. Yes, you are. You defend hierarchy. That's like the whole thing. And he's not talking about egalitarianism, but when he justifies and defends hierarchy, that's anti-egalitarian in concept. So oftentimes it won't be in that sense. Or people will do it a lot by feel. There's a lot of lizard brain thinking on the right. I think it's kind of necessary of like we need the strong man to take over. A lot of people just like the idea of ceding all of their difficulties to the one guy who claims he'll fix everything, and they just like I'll just let Donald Trump handle it all. There's a lot of that, and a lot of times people don't think about it in these terms. Most people don't know what this means, don't know about these ideas. A lot of people don't realize that that's the distinction. A lot of times it's just like I hate this group of people, and that guy hates this group of people, and generally that's because he wants them to be an underclass, and I also want them to be an underclass. So therefore, there's a lot of hate that goes into it too. A lot of the justification is indirect. People won't go out there and say I'm against egalitarianism sometimes, but often they do. You're probably a wiser person than I am, so I expect are unlikely to have watched as many Nazis on the internet talk as I have. And as it turns out, they are very open about not being egalitarian. They very clearly have some groups they think are better and not. Even like you can listen to fascist talk, like they'll talk about Nazis are a really good example because they make it plain. They'll say, yeah, we want the white people to be on the top and the other people to either not be there or be at the bottom. But then one of the problems with fascism is the top of the pyramid shrinks. It's kind of a tendency that they have. But this is becoming more and more open. There's a guy called John Doyle who I saw in debate with a bunch of other people. He's a prominent YouTuber, at least to my understanding. He was in a debate with a bunch of other people wherein he was the least interesting person there, and he was out there saying that equality is antithetical to the right. I think that's a thing we're going to start hearing a lot more and a lot more openly. And a lot of people are actually on board with that. Remember also, it's really easy to get people on board with a hierarchy if you tell them they're closer to the top. If they're not at the bottom, it's pretty easy to get them on board. And once the hierarchy's there, it doesn't matter that a majority of people are opposed to you because they don't have that kind of power. This is why, bringing it back to capitalism again, if a boss wants to do something, if a CEO wants to make his workers' life harder, he just has to like give an order, right? He can just say, okay, we're reducing wages by this amount. If workers want to combat that, they need many of them to go on strike, to threaten something that not even the power they have, but simply not contributing, like not providing the only thing of value that the company has, which is productivity, to remove that from the CEO to make them listen. This is why you need so many people for a strike, but a CEO only just needs. I hope that helps with the whole capitalism is an egalitarian thing, or work for someone. Well, you say work for someone else, but that's not always an option. This is kind of the thing. This is another thing that comes up a lot of when people start to talk about capitalism as wage slavery, and people are like, oh, but you can choose to work there or not. Well, you can't choose to not be a slave. You have to. No. I'm not even talking about a monopoly. I'm saying you have to work for somebody. And the basic mechanism of capitalism is that some percentage of your work, of the value provided to the company, is siphoned off to go towards the top, to the people who own. But even aside from that, even if I go to work for another company, which maybe there aren't enough people hiring, or maybe it's just a bad time in the job market. Remember the stories you've heard from the Great Depression. People were often looking for work and they had really terrible conditions, but there was nowhere else to find work. And remember, there's an implicit coercion there. If you don't work, you don't eat. And so the tool, like, even if you go work somewhere else, the conditions still have gotten worse where in that business. The other people are still just as suck. They can't all go search for work. Generally aren't enough jobs to satisfy that concern. There's just much less power in the hands of an individual worker than there is in the hands of the executives. It's just an unequal system. I hope that's helped. I've gotten deterred from what I was going to talk about, but I'm very glad that we did talk about this stuff. So I'm not like upset that I got deterred, but this is gonna seem like so. No. Please don't apologize, Peachy Keen. I really appreciate it. I love when chat. I love talking with chat and going over stuff, and I'm really glad for any conversation. So I'm very glad that you do chat with me here and frequently. So no, please don't apologize. I'm grateful. I'm more mean to apologize for myself because what I'm about to talk about seems like it's completely different. But one of the things I was saying was like a problem I have with the Democratic Party, and I was reminded while watching some of this Trump stuff before getting on stream, and I don't remember why it was relevant, but it's like kind of important, is that a lot of one of the huge problems that the Democratic Party has is that the right will often, or the Republican Party will say something like, I want to do something terrible, and the Democratic Party is, I just want to not do that terrible thing, but nobody's trying to make things better. A good example is something like immigration. Trump wants to build a border wall and kick out asylum seekers and make it impossible for them to seek asylum even, and break international law by redirecting them to other countries and yada yada, etc. The Democrats will say, no, don't do that. But no one says, hey, maybe our immigration laws are actually too strict. Maybe we should be making it easier for people to come to this country because they are, well, first of all, because they're people and they're looking for a better place to live and like freedom of movement. That's another thing. You're asking what the green quadrant looks like. Freedom of movement is another big thing. Open borders are not tenable right this moment. I think there'd be a little bit too much chaos. But why should it be illegal for me to go to, for example, like why should it be illegal for someone who was born in Cuba to come to the United States? Currently, it's illegal. Or you need approval because it's to go to some country or other, because otherwise, without that approval, you are doing so illegally. And it's just a restriction on human movement. You only get one life. Why shouldn't you be able to go to different places, experience different parts of the world? I mean, there are reasons if you're going to different places to commit crimes, but that should be the exception as opposed to the rule of nobody can go anywhere without approval. And maybe that's something that we should be looking into. Maybe so just on the basis of they're humans and they should, freedom of movement is important. But also immigrants contribute positively towards the country in many ways, including
increasing the amount of labor and so on and so forth. But even if they didn't, I want to be clear, even if they didn't, it would be good to allow that. But this is a thing that's so rarely talked about, right? Because the bounds of our discussion are right here, right in this little area. The right will say, hey, let's do some repugnant shit. Democrats will say, hey, don't do that repugnant shit. But we don't have a powerful party voice saying, hey, let's do some good shit instead. And that was something that was kind of, again, I don't remember why I had that thought watching Trump talk previously. It didn't come up when we were watching that video together, but it is something that came up, and it's a real problem. And this is why it is insufficient for the Democrats to win. It is necessary for the Republicans to lose. Don't get me wrong. The Republican Party is openly anti-democratic at this point, openly fascist in many, many ways, and the amount of damage that they have done, continue to do, and will do is, well, it's hard to hyperbolize. We'll put it that way. And it's very important that the Republican Party does not win in any sort of political in any of their political efforts. But the Democrats winning is not enough, because unfortunately the Democrats don't do what they need to do. We see this with Supreme Court justices, for example. The Republican Party was in violation of their duties in the Senate when they refused to confirm Obama's justice nomination at the end of his term. They just refused to do it. But he was unwilling to act outside of what is outside of the decorum, outside of what is considered appropriate, and simply install his pick then, and just go, screw it. If you guys won't do it, if you guys won't do your job, I'll do my job without you. At least force action, right? But then, the Democrats are similarly unwilling to do the same to prevent three justice appointments during one Republican term in the Trump administration. The third one being very near the end of his presidency. They would have full justification to do what the Republicans did for almost a year instead for just a couple of months. But they didn't do it. They were unwilling to do it. And Trump got 3 Supreme Court picks in his 4 years in office. On top of that, you also had Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a liberal justice who didn't retire during the Obama administration, and instead was just hoping to live out the Trump administration, I guess. Didn't, and now we have that problem again. If she had retired, that would have been much better. There are lots of these things where, the Democrats don't do enough to prevent the problems. The only thing, they don't try to make things better. Most of the time. Sometimes they do, and there are some bills that I have heard passed in the Senate that are very, very good, and maybe I'll bring my friend on when we come back to talk about those. But the Democrats often just don't do enough to do good things. They're ineffective at stopping the bad things, and so it's not good enough. The Democrats just aren't good enough, and we should demand more from them. The Republican Party, well, at this point, they're just the enemy. At this point, they're just trying to make the world worse, and that needs to not happen. And so, in as much as the Democrats stop them, we should support them. And in as much as they're not good enough, we should demand better from our politicians. Maybe we need the rise of a third party. Maybe we need a fundamental reshaping of the Democratic Party, which has happened multiple times. In the 80s, it kind of moved rightwards because of people like Thatcher and, was it Thatcher? I think it was Thatcher, and Reagan. The right has been reshaped. Well, it got reshaped a lot in the 1960s, as we talked about previously, but also by Trumpism, and it just moved further rightward. Restructuring is possible. Ideological shifts are possible, but we need one in the Democratic Party and to the left. The problem is both parties are too much in the pockets of large companies. And I know that sounds conspiratorial, but there was I don't want to go find it now because I think I'm gonna finish streaming kind of soon, actually. I don't want to find it now, but as I understand it, there were studies done about how much the will of the people, quote unquote, corresponds to what Congress does. And there's essentially no correlation between what the people want and what Congress does, but there is nearly one-to-one correlation between what the ultra wealthy want, what businesses want, and what Congress does from both parties. And that is a huge problem. Like, this is why people rail against capitalism. It is exacerbating the political problems we have and the inability for us to get anything better than the party of, well, let's just not make things worse. You see this in a lot of stuff, and I don't want to get too far into it. There's a really interesting video by a creator called Sean talking about J.K. Rowling that I'm reminded of, because he talks about one of her books where, you know, it's on the subject of politics, and the win is just things didn't get worse. Nobody tried to make things better. It's just it didn't go bad. And that's not enough. That's not enough. So as much as I would prefer Trump to, we'll circle back. As much as I would prefer Trump to win in the primary because he is less effective than DeSantis, and it would be harder for bad things to happen, he needs to lose, DeSantis needs to lose, and we need better than what we have. Is that inevitable in capitalism, or is it possible to block a government from benefiting corporations? So how do I answer this? In systems that we have generally seen, I don't think it's possible, because ultimately money has power, money has sway, and any system in which a person can accrue wealth, can leverage that wealth into power. This is actually something that came up in American history, is that presidents didn't used to get a pension, and one president was like homeless after he was president. I forget which one. And Congress passed a presidential pension basically because they felt bad for him. But the point is, imagine what a former president would be willing to do for money if they needed it. We've already seen hints of what Trump allegedly has done for money with the documents that he had at Mar-a-Lago. I won't go too much into that. I'd say, like, look into the news stories and what's been going about that, and I'll just pepper the word allegedly in here a few times. Allegedly. And so I don't think it's possible to avoid that. Now, theoretically, it could be possible. One of the things I liked a lot in Plato's Republic is, and maybe I was taught wrong, or maybe I misread it or whatever, but at least I like the idea, even if it wasn't in there, was that while he described his system had the philosopher kings making the decisions, who were like raised from birth, maybe not from birth, but like raised based on aptitude. Like, you figure out at early ages who would be good at this, and then they're raised from early childhood to be the philosopher kings and make all the decisions, which, all right, we won't get into that. And then there were also the guardians, who were basically the army, the people who, at an early age were determined, they'll probably be good at this and not good at being a philosopher king or whatever. They can be the army and whatever. And then there's the everybody else. Now, there is a hierarchical issue there. I'm not going to get too much into it. The thing that is often missed, that I think is really important, is, at least as I understood it, the philosopher kings and the guardians were not allowed to own. You get what the government gives you. It's not a lot. It's enough to live, but your motivation should be, one, you were raised to do this, and two, more importantly, your motivation should be towards the good of the people and the society. In a situation like that, where the people if you are in power, that's it. You cannot own things anymore. This is the amount you get. It is enough to live. It's like, maybe it's comfortable living, like a middle class life or something like that. But you cannot have more than this, like by law. Then a capitalist system would be less likely to have the ability to leverage that wealth, because the people with the reins of power aren't able to, or would be a crime for them to have lobbying and fundraising or whatever, and like have their lives enriched in that way. However, a lot of the money that corporations give to politicians is in the form of campaign donations or through super PACs where they help them get elected, and this is very indirect. So even in that circumstance, yeah, I don't think it's possible to avoid it. It's a problem. It's a real problem because ultimately, money, ultimately wealth, gives you power, and when you have that power, you can leverage political power or whatever else. Gotta go, but this graph is great. A finally tangible metric that I can use to understand politics. Actually, it's good timing for you to get going because I was about to wrap up stream anyway. I expect my girlfriend to be here very shortly, and I think we covered a lot. And I really appreciate just talking with chat. This is something I wanted to do a lot more. So thanks for talking with me. Hopefully, we'll get more people in the future chatting along. We can just talk about stuff. And as I said previously, I encourage everybody who has disagreements or any ideas they want to share, hit me up in the comments. Please like, comment, subscribe. And in case you missed it, I will be out of town next week, so don't expect any streams. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good one.